Welcome, everybody, to the first International Peer Respite Soteria Summit. My name's Al Galves. I'm a psychologist in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and I'm part of a group here that's creating a Soteria House for Las Cruces. I'm honored to welcome you all today. We have over 600 people registered for the summit, and we come from 37 countries, including Australia, Belgium, Brazil, Canada, Colombia, Croatia, the Czech Republic, among others. Now, I'm excited about welcoming because I am so enthused and excited about what we're doing, because Soteria houses and peer respite houses are absolutely wonderful, safe, humane, life-enhancing approaches to helping people who are going through hard times. And this is something that's really sorely needed by our country and by the whole world in order to help people who are, as I say, going through hard times. So we're meeting today for 3 hours. We'll have a 15-minute break, and this summit will continue for the next 2 Sundays at the same time and the same link as today. Please join us for each session as you're able to, as we'll continue to go into the nuts and bolts of working to start peer respites or Soteria houses in your area. And that's what we're hoping. We're hoping that this starts a movement to bring Soterias and peer-run respites to the entire world. So the summit's been organized by a volunteer planning team who came together with a shared passion for alternatives. And I want to say that the main energy and wisdom behind this has been rethinking psychiatry. That is really, those are the people that really got this going. And I want to give a shout out to the National Empowerment Center and to Mad in America, who have done an extra special job of helping with this. So thanks to all who've contributed their time and resources and ideas to make the summit a reality. We'd like to recognize the donations, large and small, from many of you that have made this summit possible. We're still accepting donations for the summit and the work that's going to follow. The summit was organized by Rethinking Psychiatry and Mind Freedom International. So we especially want to thank our sponsors, the National Empowerment Center, the New York Association of Psychiatric Rehabilitation Services, Montana's Peer Support Network, International Peer Support in honor of Sherry Mead, who established the world's first fully run peer-run respite, Resist, the International Society for Psychological and Social Approaches to Psychosis, ISEP, the International Society for Ethical Psychology and Psychiatry, an anonymous donor in honor of emotional CPR, People USA, the Copeland Center for Wellness and Recovery, the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors, and Al Galves, yours truly. Please note that we are recording today both the panel and the question and answer period. If you'd rather not be identified in the question and answer, either turn off your camera or change your name. Do whatever makes you feel comfortable. Recordings of the summit will be available at the summit webpage. And we're also going to do we're going to produce a group of crisply edited videos to send around the world about this. Closed captioning is available for each session. You can now click at the CC at the bottom of your screen, click on Show Subtitles, and they will show at the bottom of your screen. You can also click on View Transcript, which will appear on the right side of your screen as a complete transcript. The closed captioning will not be perfect. Zoom has a hard time spelling Soteria and peer respite, for example. We hope it will be helpful for those who would like it, even though it won't be completely accurate. Feel free to make comments or ask questions in the chat anytime. We ask participants to keep themselves on mute until the question and answer session. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, you may turn on your camera and raise your Zoom hand by clicking on the reactions button at the bottom of the screen. And there you'll see a icon that says raise hand. You can do that. So we look forward for time for interaction and diving deeper into the topics that have brought us together. Again, welcome to this summit. And it's now my pleasure to introduce Jen Kilyon of the Soteria United Kingdom Network, who will be the moderator for today's summit session. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Al. And it's really, really great to be with you all today, all around the world. It feels like a real privilege to be here. And since I've been part of this wonderful planning team, I've really learned such a lot. So as Al said, I'm from the UK and I'm chair of the UK Soteria Network. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how I got involved in that. Oh, over 20 years ago, my son became trapped in the mental health system here. And I didn't really know anything about that, especially for people who were going through really hard times, things that we might call altered states, or that thing we sometimes call psychosis. It was all new to me. And to start with, I just assumed if someone was in hospital, then it would actually help them. And it took me quite a while to realise that for many people, a system that forces people to be where they don't feel at all comfortable can, for some people, do more harm than good. It took me a while to realise that. And so many people in my situation, families, for example, can feel very powerless because if the law is there, they can't change the law. And it can be very, very difficult to do anything about it. It can be very heartbreaking and frustrating. And I know families all over the world who are going through what I went through all those years ago. It stayed like that for a long time. I wasn't able to change anything for a long time for my son, but I got to find out through organisations like ISPS International that there were different ways of working that didn't always involve locking people up and forcing them to take things that might not have helped them. And that's when I got involved in the Soteria Network. And that would be, at least 15 years ago, when Lauren Mosher came to the UK, and that's on a speaking tour, and that's when the Soteria Network was founded. And I learned so much through that, and I stayed with it, and I eventually became the chair. And I did open a Soteria House as a pilot project for a year. I learned a lot from that, but I've learned even more since I've been involved in this wonderful summit, and I hope all of you people out there all over the world will be listening and learning too. So before I introduce our fantastic panel that we've got lined up for us today to talk about what sometimes might seem like the boring things, the things that we've called the admin container, so all the organisational structure, access to funding, how that might fit in with the policy environment, things around citing the house and dealing with a community, all of those things that are really, really important, but not always easy to do. I just wanted to remind people that as Al said, we're here for 3 hours and then we'll officially end. And after that, there will be time for people to stay on and share some of their experiences and comment on things. But the panel, we can't expect the panel to stay on for more than 3 hours. So it'd be really good if you've got questions for the panel that you're able to put them in the chat. And you could perhaps, if it's a question for the panel or for a particular member, perhaps if you could put that first in the chat, that would help, because there's such a lot of wonderful dialogue and discussions going on in there. It can be really hard for people to pick out the questions. So it would be really helpful if you could try doing that once we get going. So I'm going to ask our panel to just in perhaps a couple of sentences, just to introduce yourself, say who you are, where you're from, and a little bit about what you're doing and why you're here, as briefly as possible before we start with the questions to the panel. So can I ask you to start first, Jim? Is that okay?
Me? Yeah, I'm Jim Gottstein. Well, I'm on Maui these days. It's a little after 6 in the morning here. After reading Mad in America, in 2002, I started the Law Project for Psychiatric Rights, whose mission is to mount a strategic litigation campaign against forced psychiatric drugging and electroshock. But I felt that we needed not to just complain and say what was going on was bad. We needed alternatives. And so one of the things I did was promote, and we got a Soteria House going in Alaska, Soteria, Alaska, for a few years. And Susan was the amazing director of that. I'm also the author of the Zyprexa papers. And one of the things in the book is I write about my representation of Bill Bigley, for whom I subpoenaed the documents. And it really demonstrates the legal importance of having alternatives too, because people have the legal right to the least restrictive and least intrusive alternatives.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah. Are you okay to just introduce yourself next, Susan? Is that okay?
Certainly, thank you. So my name is Susan Musante. As Jim said, I was the first director of Soteria, Alaska. I didn't really in my life aspire to do that. But I had worked in a state hospital mainly because I couldn't get another job. That's all that was available. And when I got there, I knew that I could actually probably be there. Back in the 70s when I was doing that, people would get committed by family members. It was treatment wasn't necessarily helping people. In fact, it was probably harming a lot of people. So I said, if I ever could find the alternative, I would do it. And then many, many years later, I started getting moved on, did other things. Many years later, I started getting emails from Psych Rights, which is Jim's organization, looking for a director for Soteria House, which at the time I didn't realize wasn't there yet. But a group of us, Jim leading the pack, built it. It was open for about 8 years. And I'm involved in the summit because, first of all, I'm very committed to helping anybody who wants to open a Soteria or even peer respite type alternatives. And today's session is really important because we're talking about organizational administrative funding and the board of directors choice of leadership. So all of that impacts not only on the opening of such alternatives, but also the sustainability. I unfortunately have experience at both ends, the implementation and not sustaining. So I want to put that out there. I think I have some insights around that. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Susan. I wonder if we could hear from Maria and then Jolene from the Peer Respite in New York State, the Rose Houses. Yes, so could you go first? Maria, you're up first on the screen. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Maria Tavoris. I live in the state of New York. Can you hear me? I am the director of the Rose Houses for People USA. So we are a 100% peer-run agency, and we operate several peer respites throughout the state. And we have also helped set up peer respites throughout the country and internationally as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jolene Darby. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at People USA. I've been with the organization about 10 years. I started off doing direct service after I found myself in recovery. I had originally anticipated working in politics, and I was working for a senator. And from there, I realized that it was really important, the conversations we're having today and supporting those in need with mental health issues and crisis. So I ended up at People USA, and I oversee all the directors that supervise our crisis respites. Jen, you're muted.
Cindy, would you like to go next? You're muted, Cindy. Can you unmute?
Is now good. Okay. My name is Cindy Fisher. I'm in Vancouver. I have a son that, like Jen, was greatly harmed in the system. And I didn't realize the harm that was happening till like 13, 14 years later. Once I did that, I became a very fierce and passionate advocate for change. I started an organization called Moms, the movement of moms or mothers standing up together, because I found out when we challenged the harm and asked for that to stop and something different to be offered, we were usually shut up, shut down, and shut out. And so having one voice against the system seemed like a very, very difficult uphill battle. So I eventually became connected with mothers and others around the country. And together we supported each other both emotionally, but also with information, legal information, advice. Today, what we're doing, Moms is not nearly as active as we have been, but I do have stories of different ways that mothers have attempted to meet the need of alternatives in the community. And if you're in the state of Washington and you're wanting to build an alliance, I'm trying to really build a local alliance in the state. And my website is called Regrounding Love, because that's what we need, regroundinglove.com. And I will be putting up more information about how to organize ourselves around creating Peer Run in Soteria. Right now, it's pretty much filled with my advocacy for my latest, greatest need of extracting my son from that harmful situation. But please keep checking back, because I talked to one of my dear friends and allies, Carrie. We call ourselves now the Soteria Sisterhood. And
Thank you.
Soteria
So, thank you, Cindy. And Pesak, could you just say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name is Pesach Lichtenberg. I'm originally from New York, but I lived for many, many years in Jerusalem, Israel. I'm a psychiatrist, professor of psychiatry. I headed a closed psychiatric ward for too many years, and decided that wasn't the right way to do psychiatry, and set up an organization. And in the last 5 years, we've set up 3 Soteria homes in Israel. We also spurred a change in government mental health care policy, so that there are many more homes, not Soterias, but far more like Soteria than like a hospital, which also provide similar services. And we hope the change will continue to happen.
Thank you, Pesak. Look forward to hearing more about that. And last but not least, I think we have Todd. Todd, thank you.
My name is Todd Nowak, and I am from Iowa. We had a very, very sad day here in Iowa yesterday. We lost to Purdue. But we actually started the Peer Respite because of a thought and a dream that came to my head. Our state shut down 2 institutions and said that they were going to funnel money back into the integration of community-based services. So I thought that, hey, a peer respite, a peer respite is a great way to start that. Although I'm still waiting for a lot of that money to come up. I've not seen it yet, but we are funded by our community, our 5-county community region. And we opened our respite 3 years ago, thanks to the expertise of many others. Steve Michio, one, Casey Moyer from Mental Health Nebraska, and then some folks in Wisconsin, and are running really good right now, and actually looking to buy our own house. You know, I think sometimes we look at people and we think about what's the best Band-Aid we could put on somebody. And when we're thinking about peer respite, we need to be thinking about how we can, you know, be that change and heal from within. And that is truly what the peer respites do.
Thank you so much, Todd. Now, I'm just checking I haven't forgotten anyone. There's no one else there waiting in the wings. No? Right. Well, we'll go ahead now then. So, so I have some questions for each of us. Going to start off with you, Pesach, if that's okay. Yeah. So, I'm wondering if you could tell us about how you worked with the Israeli Psychiatric Association. I might not have got the right title, so that you could include or change the policy to make it easier for psychiatrists to support the work of Soteria. Is that something that you're okay to talk to us about?
Yeah, well, the Israel Psychiatric Association is not that crucial in the story.
No. So can you tell us what you think is more crucial then in terms of...
As always, the crucial elements are recognition by the regulatory authorities and funding by the insurance people. Now, it took me 12 years from the time I wrote the first protocol of the Soteria home I would like to set up until it actually happened on the ground. 12 years during which I went to the Ministry of Health, I went to the insurance people, and everybody said, wonderful idea, but it's not our responsibility. It is, nothing happened. Then in 2016, something changed in the climate, in the public climate, where there was suddenly a prominent radio show host who was highlighting every day the abuses happening in psychiatric wards. This is the 16th day that she's tied to her bed. This is the 17th day. Things were changing. And I said, this is the opportunity I've been waiting for. Nobody is going to fund me now. Let me start with philanthropy. Now, and that's how we started, as sort of an underground operation, not really underground. I made sure that we would be on the news after about a month of operating, because we wanted to make some waves. It was a tactical move that they wouldn't dare close us down when the hospitals are getting such bad press. And if they did, we'd know how to turn that to our advantage. Now, I had certain advantages here, which Soteria doesn't often enough have. I ran a department, a conventional ward. I was in the university. I'm a professor. I had this public standing. So you know, people hear professor, they think that you have something to say, and though probably have a lot to say, and much of it is wrong, but no one closed me down, and within 1 year, and then there were a lot of risks in this, I should add. I remember during that year, I even asked I asked a very prominent lawyer who made his career by suing doctors. I contacted him to ask what the risks are and what I'm doing. And he very generously agreed to give me a pro bono legal opinion, which was very long, detailed, and the bottom line was that when the inevitable catastrophe happens, you and your staff will pay with your license, with your property, and with your freedom, which was a bit unsettling, I admit. For a while, the insurance decided they wouldn't cover us, but then this is where being a part of the system was able to help. I got in touch with the Ministry of Health. They produced a supportive letter, which was enough to satisfy the insurance people. And they started working to develop guidelines for the sort of service which we were offering. And And what happened then is that after 1 year after we illegally or without regulatory approval set up our first house, we were approved by the government. They decided that what we were doing is acceptable, and they provided the guidelines, which was wonderful. It was terrible in that suddenly we were going to be regulated, but it was good in that this is what we wanted, because from the very beginning, we knew that what's important for us is to be a part of the system. We knew that we were going against the generally accepted way of doing things. We knew that we could easily set up one house, maybe two houses, and just be this kind of anti-establishment group telling everybody the right way to do things, but that's not what we wanted. We hoped for this a strategic decision to be a part of the system, to influence the system from within. And if that means regulation, and if that means making certain compromises, then we will find a way to do it without harming the core of what a Soteria house is, in terms of empathic understanding, being with the person non-judgmentally rather than trying to do something to him. That the backbone of the staff remains non-professional people who are there listening, supporting, talking, exchanging ideas and experiences with the residents who come to get their help. So that remains untouched. That is the way Soteria happens everywhere and in our homes. But at the same time, because the government set up this official guidelines, the Ministry of Health, which is a regulator here, that allowed other people who liked the idea to get on board, and they set up their own houses, not exactly Soteria, less forthcoming and talking about how they have doubts about medication, less prominently pronouncing the flattening of hierarchy, which is in our homes, but still much more humane, much more like a Soteria than like a hospital, unquestionably. And this is for people who who need to be hospitalized. It's not some kind of Airbnb with a little bit of therapy. This is for people in serious psychotic states. Now, psychotic states, depressed, manic, all sorts of situations. I say psychotic as I think it was Jen who said, we call this altered states. This is always sort of living in both worlds. Within the home, there's no place for diagnosis. But when we talk to the regulator and when we talk to the insurance people, we have to, we speak the language. I mean, I wrote a chapter on psychiatric diagnosis, a skeptical chapter in a textbook, but so we know how to do this. I'm sorry there's activity around me. Sometimes I'm right now in one of our Soteria homes, so I can't promise you what's going to happen. Now, insurance. Okay, so in the beginning, we worked with philanthropy. And in the beginning, very few people came. They didn't know what we were trying to do. It was just some kind of curiosity. And then after we got regulation, so it was possible to start talking about with the insurance carriers. In Israel, as in every civilized country, there is universal healthcare insurance, right? You're with me here? It's carried by there are 4 insurance carriers which cover 100% of citizens, and we started talking with them, and bit by bit they started coming on board. So by now, most of the people coming into us are covered by the insurance carriers. Other houses are also, some of the other houses which have been set up are covered by insurance carriers. Now, at this point, and now why are the insurance people interested in us? Why should they pay for us? they are understandably reluctant, not because they don't like our service. They understand that for the people they insure, they would rather come into a Soteria home than into the hospital. But they are concerned because if we believe that there is, in light of the number of hospital beds that are in the country, in light of the people who they treat, and again, for many years I was in charge of one of these wards, knowing from the inside how many of these people could actually come into a Soteria home. Not all of them by any means. I mean, you have people going to psychiatric wards who can be completely uncooperative, violent, and just refusing. You know, someone who doesn't want our care, we have no way and no desire bringing them into the home. But when you take into consideration how many people could come into a Soteria home, I figure that there is the potential of 100 to 130 such homes in Israel. Now, at this point, if I include the other homes which following us were set up, again, not strictly speaking Soteria, but very, very friendly, much more similar to us than different. So you have about 10 or 11 such homes operating now. To get from 0 homes to 10 or 11, I think, is much more difficult than to get from 10 to 100. And the insurance people are interested because, as I said, they know that that the insured people would like the service. They know that we are cheaper than a hospital, not much cheaper, but cheaper. They believe, which early research results support, that there's a less revolving door. So you don't just look at the cost now, but you look over the next year or two, and people are less likely to be rehospitalized. Or what even Lauren Mosher in his research has found, that while so-called symptomatic relief is similar in hospitals or in Soteria, if you look 2 years down the road at psychosocial acclimation, which is another way of saying the ability of a person to return to his life trajectory, your chances are better after a Soteria stay than a hospital stay. So we work well with the 4 HMOs in this country. Of course, it's regulation and all the headaches that that entails, but that's fine. But it's making serious inroads. I was in the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, a few days ago, listening to a special meeting where the Minister of Health, who has, since he started his job as minister several months ago, has made clear that mental health is a first priority of his, and he had a PowerPoint presentation how he'd like the system to be, and on almost half of these slides there was a mention of these homes. In Israel they're called balancing homes. Not a wonderful phrase, but they mean homes like this, and it's become a very prominent, accepted part of what we do, of the healthcare, of the mental health care system. Which still has to expand further, but it's doing fine. We've gone in 5 years from nobody understanding what we want from them to it being an accepted part of the system. And the homes which are supported by the HMOs have waiting lists. Many more homes are being planned to be set up. I have meetings, a couple every week, about all kinds of ideas, and it's frustrating that we haven't gone even quicker with this, but we're making progress, and we'll have to make a lot more. Okay, that's briefly.
Thank you so much. I think that's a really inspiring story and gives other countries hope for the future, that we can learn from this. It's amazing what you've achieved in what you say is a relatively short pace of time. So that's wonderful to hear, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions in the chat, and we can come back and hear a bit more about it later, but I want to make sure we've got time to hear about all the other wonderful projects and houses that are going on. I was going to ask Todd, you able to, it'd be really interesting, I wonder if you could say something about how you approached the authorities that were closing down the houses, how you approached them in Iowa, before you got the first Peer Respite that's been open for, is it a couple of years now, 2 or 3 years it's been open? So how you went about approaching them and persuading them, because it's a really big step, and I think lots of other people will be really interested to know how you went about that.
Sure. And like I said, I made connections with Steve Michio out of New York with the Rose House, as well as Casey Moyer from Mental Health Nebraska in Omaha, that's been running the Kia House for many years, and asked them how they really approached, the idea that 2 institutions were shutting down and money funneled back into the community, and just got some ideas from them. But I went to my 5-county region, and they are funding a lot of the crisis services. And I explained to them what a peer respite was, did some presentations, and I also went to our main hospital, the philanthropy, and approached them and said, hey, I think this is not a one piece, right? Not one organization, not one person wants to fund peer respite. And both of them, the region and the hospital, said, well, who should fund it? And I said, well, if you have neighbors on each side of you, them. If you have church members, them. If you have an employer, them. Because mental health affects everywhere, right? But I think that if we're shutting down 2 institutions, we should really look at using that money for some points that won't have to cost us more money. Because I don't know about other states, but what I see here in Iowa is we are so worried about that crisis, like I said, that we are funding the higher dollar cost that sometimes doesn't give us the output, the outcomes of what we need to be able to move people further in their recovery and live a life that they want, to be well, live well, and stay well. We're telling them what they need by funding them higher cost at times. And so when we think about peer respite, that's the beginning, right? And I often say to my region and other funders, I think of this as going out in the middle of a cornfield in Iowa and building a 2-story house. You have to build at least 12 steps to get to the 2nd story. Do you leave off step 1 through 6 and just jump up to step 6? No. So why are we just funding them higher cost services that, again, continue to put them Band-Aids on people and not heal within? And they really had, there was some stigma around it, but able to bring in the Kia House and do a presentation statewide, because we wanted even the state leaders in DHS to see this. And it's taken 3 years, well, actually about 4 to 5. But now, where are we now? We are at a point where there's a grant for state peer-run organizations to do peer respite, and that's what we wanted, right? One of the other pieces that we did was we thought it would be important for legislation to change, right? And who can make them policies. So I connected with a local senator, and actually that senator took the bill that was from Wisconsin and kind of formatted it in her own words and took it in to have a bill passed to fund peer respites. Unfortunately, that did not happen because I was called to the Human Services Committee at the Senate side. And when I went to present to them on the peer respite, what I found out is they didn't even know what peer support was. To come and find out, they didn't even know that their state was funding peer support. So, I've learned a lot in the last 12, 14 years. But one thing I know is sometimes our funders don't even know what it is they're funding. And for me, it's important to capture them outcomes, right? To see what that person was like when they came into the respite, to see where they were in the middle of that stay at the respite, and to see where they are at the end of the stay at the respite, but to continue. And that continuous is that piece on follow-up. And it, a prime example that I like to use is in 2019, somebody used a an inpatient unit 9 times. And since coming to us in January of 2020, has not yet gone back to an inpatient. Now, is that because of us? I don't think it's because of us. I think it's because of that person. But I think that we really were assistants with that. I'm sorry, Jen, you're on mute.
Sorry. So that's really an inspirational story, Todd. And it's really good to hear of that persistence, not giving up. Same that we heard from Pesach too. And also good that he connected with other people, other states. And that's partly what we're hoping this summit will do, help people connect with other people who might be one step ahead, or and how we can all learn from each other's experiences. But that's inspirational. I was going to ask Jim next, if you could tell us, when you were working and opening on the Soteria Alaska House, could you tell us how you decided what kind of organizational structure you felt would be the most helpful, and what made you just go for that?
You bet. Thanks, Jen. And I'm not going to be nearly as inspirational as Pesach and Todd, but this is kind of the nuts and bolts of, how do you get, get to where you can actually be doing these inspirational things. And I'm familiar with the United States, and so I don't know to what extent this applies other places. Theoretically, you can have, a for-profit type of organization, and there are lots of different ones: corporations, limited liability corporations, sole proprietorships, partnerships, limited partnerships, that kind of things. But basically, I don't think that's very viable realistically. So I'm going to focus on the two other ones that I think really make are possibilities, real possibilities. One is the nonprofit tax exempt organization. The other would be part of a government agency. And I think those are the two realistic options. And people don't necessarily know exactly, they talk about nonprofit. And you can be, set up your own nonprofit, or you can be part of an already established nonprofit, and there's pros and cons of both of those. The pro of having your own one is you're in charge and you get to do what you want to do. The con is it's can be pretty tentative, and if you're part of an established one, there are maybe lots more resources and stability there. And even maybe some political influence that to help protect you. Now, forgive me if people already know all this, but a lot of times I find people don't. So there are really two aspects in the U.S. of setting up a nonprofit, and nonprofit isn't really exactly the right term. It's well, it is in the state context. So what you have to do is be incorporated in the state as a not-for-profit corporation, but that doesn't give you the key tax status, which is to be tax exempt, where people donate money to you that they can deduct it from their taxes. And the important thing is wealthy people and foundations and even government agencies that might want to provide funding, they pretty much require that you be a tax exempt under the tax laws of the United States. One of the interesting things in Alaska is they have this like form, articles of incorporation, but it doesn't have a key paragraph in it that is required to get tax exempt status under the Internal Revenue Code, the tax code. And so if you just take the state form, it's not going to work. And that chapter basically says, or that paragraph says that if you dissolve, that any assets you have will go to another tax exempt organization. So you could, it varies somewhat by state, but it's very quick to be able to be incorporated as a nonprofit in a state. I mean, at some point in Alaska, you could do it in 3 days. Typically, I think you need at least 3 board of directors members, and picking the board of directors is really important. I'm not going to take the time to go into some of my experiences there, but that's really important. And then once you're incorporated, then you apply to the Internal Revenue Service for tax exempt status. And that can take quite a bit of time, but a really good thing about that is that you've got 15 months to apply from when the time that you become incorporated. And then it may take, 6 months, 9 months, 18 months. It used to be, quicker, and I'm not sure how long it takes now. And they've got this new quick version if you're not going to have much money, which isn't going to apply for Soteria or Peer Respites. But the good thing is that while you're waiting for what they call an advanced determination letter that you're going to be tax exempt, is donations at that point can be are considered tax deductible. So if during that first 15 months, during the time from the time you've applied, from the time. Anyway, you've got 15 months to apply, and then any donations are tax deductible. Now, one other thing that I kind of want to mention about this is in most places, most states, there are 2 types of nonprofits. One is a member organization, and the other is what's called a self-perpetuating board. So in the member organizations, you have voting members, and you have to have an annual meeting, and the members elect the board of directors, and that's the key thing that the members do, is elect the board of directors. And in the self-perpetuating one, the board members elect the other board members. And I think for this type of an effort, I pretty strongly recommend the self-perpetuating one. I think it's just a lot easier to administer. You don't have to deal with proxies and having the member meetings and all that kind of stuff. Although I'll say, it could be that maybe if you had a membership organization, it would really put pressure on the board to be true to the mission. Might also be true that you'd lose control of the mission depending on changes in the memberships. If you're a government agency, I think there's no way you're going to be. It doesn't seem like you're going to be a separate government agency. So you'd be part, if you're going to be, go that route, you'd be part of some, government agency like the Department of Behavioral Health or something like that. And that's got pros and cons too. I think one of the real positive parts of that is, you really, as part of the government, then you have maybe more, better chance of sustainability, retaining. Although also in the government, things can, really change, and people have different ideas and priorities, and you can become in fashion and then go out of fashion, or there can be something happen that causes problems. So I think this sort of kind of what nuts and bolts type of thing is kind of boring, but it's important to know how to get things going.
I agree, Jim, really, really important. And it's worth bearing in mind. I think Al at the beginning was saying, although we have 5 sessions in October as part of this summit, we are determined to carry on with this work and provide support and set up a network, an international network. And these are the kind of things that will differ from country to country, obviously. But people like you, Jim, that have had this experience of getting to grips with all of this, just hurts my head to hear about it all. But I agree, it's important, and we need to know how we can set things up so that we can get the most out of the funding, but as far as possible ensure that things are sustainable and workable. And I think
and I'm going to be available to. I'm going to want to try and help.
I'm sure Jim would be available to give people advice. It's great to know we've got someone like you, Jim, that understands all the details. So, Susan, whilst we're still thinking about the work you did in Alaska, I was just thinking about what decisions you made when you were choosing the house and the situation, what you were looking for when you were setting it up, thinking about the right environment, both inside the house and its surroundings, to support the people to come through their experiences and make some meaning of it, because all of those things are crucial if you haven't got those things right. So would you be able to say a bit about that? How
sure.
Thanks so much, Susan.
Before I do that, though, I just want to say Jim did an incredible job of bringing together the right leadership on the board, and I do hope at some point in the future, as we continue nuts and bolts, that you can talk to us about how you choose board members and that sort of thing, because or whether it's an advisory board or board members, that leadership is like so critical. So, but house, all right. So what I think, so when we thought about the house, we looked at a variety of different things, which I included. I'm actually going to go back to something that Stan, who's been critical to this whole nuts and bolts group, has been saying. Everything goes back to being with, and I do agree with that. So in citing a house or finding a house, one of the things we looked for was a house that would provide an environment where the whole community would be able to grow and be together and being with together, and that also so much of what happens in the house happens in the context of that house community and then the greater community. So looking at the environment, we were fortunate in that we kind of had a turnkey operation. We were able to lease a bed and breakfast, so it came fully furnished, including lovely little robes and slippers in each of the rooms. So the first, they did not last forever, of course, but the first crew of folks were welcomed into a bed and breakfast environment with, and it was basically a duplex, so it had two sides, but we broke through the door. So we had two kitchens, basically two, sort of a living room and a sitting room. And one of the kitchens was most significant activity happened in the kitchen, as it does so often in so many homes around cooking, eating, and having conversation. But I would say we looked at several different things. So one would be the actual house environment itself, access. So access to transportation, school near university, or ability to get to university, or high school type programs, because we had young people, some of whom were trying to get their high school equivalent, what we call in the US high school equivalency diploma. We had people living there who had the ability to go to classes. They were able to go to work if they had a job. I mean, there might be days when they weren't, but they didn't lose their job because they were locked up in an institution and couldn't get out to go to school or go to, and one really positive thing, one of our early residents was a young man who had, when he would get frustrated, he could be aggressive and somewhat violent, although I don't think he ever really hurt anybody, but he would scare people, I guess is what I'd say. He could be scary. So he wanted to continue in his classes. So we were able to have some Soteria staff go with him. They posed as students. Everybody thought they were in the class. There were a couple that would go, and they would just be there to kind of help him stay safe so he could be in the class, and then to help him if he wasn't able to process on that particular day, to process what was learned, and in that way he was able to continue with his class. So that's an example of access. The house was situated where he could get there, but also had that the ability to help people continue in the community as well as in the house. One of my mentors, Alma Men, really walked around the house with me to talk about safety, because sometimes people will have a behavior or that you might not expect them to do, and so she would walk around and say, you know, that lamp is fairly dangerous. Let's think about, is there another way to place the lamp, or so that somebody wouldn't either knock it over or use it, and that sort of thing. So safety also within the house. And one of the things we looked at was entrances and exits. So because it was a duplex, there were several entrances and exits, and there would be times when people would leave the house because it's voluntary. You can come and go as you please. But we wanted to be aware because sometimes people were in a state that maybe they might not be so safe outside. So we would want to be aware that they left the house so that either someone could go with them if they would like that, but at least pay attention to who was there and who wasn't there. So we did have several entrances and exits, but we had to pay attention to how we would know people were coming and going. So I would say, you know, safety, access, and then the big thing was community. Was the community welcoming? Was it a community that would be conducive to people who might be in an altered state, maybe speaking in a way that another person might not understand, and unfortunately, our community was not happy that the bread and breakfast turned into a Soteria house, and we were advised that we should really do a lot of community relations type of things. So we spent several Saturdays knocking on doors, introducing ourselves, explaining what we were doing. In retrospect, I don't know that that helped us, but in fact, it may have hurt us, because I don't know that they would have known who we were if we didn't tell them. But I believe in transparency, but I will say it caused us some serious issues. I remember going to a community meeting, and people twist what you're doing. So they're like, oh, this is a house for sex offenders. And it's like, no, that's not true. That's not what this house is for. And by the way, let me show you the map of where all the sex offenders are in this neighborhood, which was like several in every block. So, but that's not what this house is. So, so there was a lot of that. In the end, we first decided not to go there, and then we came back around because the house was really so perfect for this project, for Soteria House. And so that's what, so in the end, we did move there. And in the long run, our residents made friends with the people in the neighborhood. You know, they knew each other, they'd wave at each other, they, you know, they chit chat with each other. So in the end, it all worked out, as life often does. But there were some people who continued to not be happy with us, and they all had my phone number. I would get calls every once in a while, but that's kind of the house siting. Does that answer your question?
That's really, really good to hear all of that. Really interesting, really important. And I know we can all learn a lot from that. And I think some of those issues will apply, whether it's a Soteria house or a Peer Respite house. Some of the issues are similar,
Absolutely.
I guess.
Absolutely.
So, thanks so much, Susan. So I was just wondering if Jolene and Maria, and you can decide how you want to play this one, could tell us a bit more about Rose Houses. I have heard, I don't know if this is so, that in New York State, that this was one of the first peer respites in the United States. Is that so? Have I got the right?
That's
message?
correct.
Yeah, good. So
We are-
and it's under the umbrella of something called People USA. Yeah. So it'd be really good if you could tell us something about how it's run and how it's funded, and how did you get support for this?
Yeah, sure thing. So
in your state. Yeah.
Yeah. So we are People USA. We have many different programs, but what we're most known for is our Rose House model, crisis respite model. We are, as Maria said, a peer-run organization. So all of our staff have lived experience in mental health, substance use, or trauma. So all the staff that we have supporting those guests that come in are a peer, and they have their own lived experience and use mutuality to connect with people. So we have multiple houses in New York State. We've also helped assist opening using our Rose House model, over 39 internationally and nationally. They're not called Rose Houses, but they use the Rose House model to kind of bring about these different houses in the community. It's a home-like environment. I'll let Maria talk a little bit about her position and how the house is structured, and the purpose of it. And then I'll maybe talk a little bit about the funding and how that works.
Okay, Maria, thank you.
So I currently supervise multiple Rose Houses. To help me supervise those Rose Houses.
Maria, could you just, Maria, I can't quite hear you. Could you just get perhaps a bit nearer?
Can you hear me better?
Yeah, great.
So I supervise multiple Rose Houses. To assist me with that, I have house managers in each house that kind of help me with scheduling, training new staff, and reporting house maintenance and documentation. We are constantly making sure the houses are clean, turning over rooms when there's new guests. The house managers really help me to ensure that the house operates smoothly, so I could focus more of my efforts on supervising the staff that we have, any new trainings that come up, higher reporting that we need to counties and stuff like that. And they really help make sure that everything runs smoothly. There's always at least one person on per shift. We have a pre-registration process. So somebody calls in, the staff will do the pre-registration, then they'll call me or another director and we'll approve the guest to come in if it's the appropriate fit.
Yeah.
So do you want to say a little bit more, Jolene, about
Yeah, so we are currently funded by the state and local government. New York State is moving towards licensing crisis respites. We've helped really assist the state in writing the regulations on what we would like to see based off our model. We have other services that actually support the Rose House, very complementary with housing programs. We have mobile outreach teams. We have a crisis stabilization center that's 24/7. So we also do have clinical staff, social workers, case managers, and peers able to offer assistance. And they too also have lived experience. So, we are balancing between the traditional and the clinical kind of world. But for us, it's really helpful because we also have staff embedded in the hospital. So in the ED. So if someone necessarily feels they're in crisis, but they're not going to get admitted, our staff is able to redirect them. And if they're interested in going to the Rose House, helping them avoid hospitalization by having a 5 to 7 day stay to work on their whole health. So we really focus on the 8 dimensions of wellness, really talking to people about food insecurity or housing insecurity, mental health, environmental. So those are some of the things that we work on when they're with us. As far as funding, all of our staff are certified peer specialists, so we could bill for the services we are providing and move away from more of those grant funded to those billable services. That is kind of where everything is headed. We do have an electronic health record, like Maria said, so using that electronic health record that we've really kind of built from scratch to be able to show the work that we do as peer providers and build through different MCOs that we have contracts with. So we are moving in that direction. I think you had mentioned before a question about whether or not we've had pushback from the communities that we. Sorry, Jen, you're muted.
Yes, sorry, yes.
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
No, if you'd like to say something about that, that will be helpful, yes.
Yeah, so we do have 4 different houses, but they're right now in the area that I'm currently working out of. They're pretty spread out. For the most part, we do get pushback when we open up a new crisis respite. The community is very fearful, and I think it's because they misunderstand. And I heard what you were saying, Susan, about people misunderstanding who we are and what we do and who we're serving. And a couple years ago, we had opened up a Rose House, and we went to a public forum, really try to educate the community so that they're more accepting, because we want these houses to be accessible and part of the community, not outside of the community. We want them to be able to still access their treatment providers and their family and community supports. So all of our houses are houses closer to residential neighborhoods. We have been, closed for a couple months at a time every time we try to open up a new one, but advocating, in the community and actually getting to know our neighbors and giving them the opportunity to come and actually do a house tour and see what we do and meet us. We always seem to turn the corner, and then they actually appreciate the house being there and the services we provide, and the staff get to know them. So I think it's based out of fear of why they push back at first, because it's that not in my backyard kind of thing, So yes, we definitely have experienced that, but I think that because we have such great support from our community providers and our Department of Behavioral Health, they've been very instrumental in also supporting us. Our county executive and legislators are always advocating for the services. A lot of what everyone else said is, a lot of hospitals have been closed down, and redirecting those funds to support people now that are in the community is like vital. And so we hope that the Rose House, reduces the cost of hospitalization, but also gives people the support that they need so they're not traumatized when going into a psychiatric unit, if that's not necessarily what's best for them.
Thank you so much, Maria and Jolene. And it would be great if in the future we could call some of you back to hear more about what you're doing. And there's what I'm seeing are really common threads between what people are saying, and it's amazing how we can all learn from each other. It's really good to hear about the work you're doing. And last but not least, Cindy, be really interested to know some of the things you've considered that were important to you in your group in deciding on the structure and the alternatives for an alternative house in Washington. Could you tell us some of the things that you think are important for that?
Sure. I would say the most important thing as a parent and family member is to build alliance not only with other parents, but also with those with lived experience. Having my own child and the other parents mostly having their own children, as I look back and as I've been involved with the Peer Respite, Rethinking Psychiatry, I think that that voice has not been centered as much in the work as we try to move forward. So I would say, however, then that can look different in each places. With me, I did connect with Rethinking Psychiatry, who at the time the peer voice wasn't that centered. However, there was a continual move towards making sure that that became a front and center voice. So if you don't have connections right away with people with lived experience, if you start with parenting groups and make sure that you do your due diligence to find out about other groups, like Hearing Voices, like the International Peer Respite. I've taken trainings that were meant for peers, and oftentimes they will allow parents, as long as we go in there not thinking we know more, but we go in there with an open mind and a humbleness. I think that's really critical. So I know that I can think offhand, besides parents who try to do it at home, and that's extremely, extremely difficult. I would say I have yet to know a parent that's been able to have the kind of success that I have read about about the peer run or the Soteria. Sometimes I think we've been able to keep our kids out of the system, but that growth, that be well, live well, stay well. I love that, Todd. I love it. Short 3 phrases. That's kind of eluded us, or most of the parents that I've worked with. But I will say, I know a couple in Tacoma, Washington, and they had started a what they called Mount Tahoma Sanctuary. It's an uplifting home in Tacoma where adults who had come through spiritual and psychological crisis can begin the process of healing without pressure. It was not staffed, but they had another organization called the Healing Field that they would invite members from the community to bring their talents and gifts, whether it was cooking skills or music or whatever. Periodically, they would have the folks invited. And how did they come to that? They were fortunate enough to have a vacation home, and they just decided that the priority was the healing of their son and others. So, and they had a deep trust in higher power. Like the day that their home actually closed, the perfect home that was in a kind of secluded, but right off the main bus line, and that came open, and they were able to secure this beautiful home that I visited. I will say that it was a learning experience for them, and certainly there was growth that happened, but there was also places where it no longer operates as that. One of the things that they insisted when they had, it was for men, when they had them come, their family had to be willing to participate in a very active way. But even with that, not having a live-in residence person and just having the couple as the main kind of director, there was a lot of lessons learned. And so they're looking at going to the next step, whatever that might be. So it was called, I think their website is the Healing Field, thehealingfield.org. And so they have information there. The groups that I work with locally in Vancouver and Portland with the Rethinking Psychiatry, we look for homes actually in the country. I think we had more of a vision of a healing farm, growing vegetables and things like that. And financially, it was like, we kept believing that somehow, the money would manifest because the cause was so great, but that never happened. And my daughter saw my struggle, and this has been like 13 years of trying to, once I realized that something beside the hospital had to be the answer for my son, and I'm not getting younger. And so she took it on herself. She's a nurse, and she wrote a grant. There's quite a bit of money out there that the government is funding for what they label, and I hate this, as SMI, seriously mentally ill, and also the homeless population. So she wrote a grant to try and get some of that money. And it was specifically for an adult family home. So it is licensed by the state. But as she went through the administration class and I went through part of it, there's a lot of leeway. And I think, Susan, I do believe that your home had some connection to that. Seems to me you told me that really not only making connections in the community, but also with the folks who come and do the inspection. If you get to know them and they get to realize what you're doing, then they don't find it so necessary to find all the little details that are wrong and ping you and find you. And that was really good to hear, because I've had I have such pain around the system and what happened to my son that I have developed this distrust of anything within the system. So it was really good to hear all the speakers today and to realize that maybe there is room and it may be necessary to build alliances in relationships. So she has a grant. It's a $300,000 grant, so that's not going to buy a house here in Vancouver. And part of that grant is that she has to do a 25% matching fund, which is about $75,000. So we're going to be doing a fundraiser soon to set that up. And I am in my second year of training with Open Dialogue, so I can offer that in that home. It'll be a 2 or 3 bedroom home. And I also, like I said, have a lot of other training. And I'm also working in tandem with a very, very strong peer who is helping guide me and will hopefully be at some of the center of this planning.
Thank you so much, Cindy. It's really good to hear that something hopeful might be coming positive after all your struggles. And I do know what that is like. I know you know, I know, yeah. So, and it'd be good to keep an update on how things are going there. And I'm sure you'll get lots of help for your funding through this wonderful network we're setting up. So, believe it or not, we've actually come to the time when we're almost ready for a break. So the idea is we're going to have a 15-minute break, and then there'll be time for all those wonderful questions I've seen popping up in the chat. Before you go on your break, just want to remind you that there'll be a poll coming up on the screen with some questions. So please answer that if you can, which will really help us work on what we're going to do next. And when you leave, I think this is how it works, there'll be a survey as well, where you can actually identify yourself if you want some feedback on the things that you're asking about. So if you can look out for those. So thanks to all the wonderful speakers so far. Thanks to Al and all the tech team behind the scenes. And look forward to seeing you again in 15 minutes for some amazing questions. Thanks so much. See you soon. Welcome back. Hope you all managed to get a bit of a break. I certainly did. So, and thanks for those of you who filled in the poll. It's really helpful to us. So, so we're back officially now for, I think about an hour and a half, if I've got my timing right. And as I said before, we can't expect the panel to stay on after the end of our 3 hours, because they've probably all got to go back and got important things to do. So what we're hoping now, first of all, is to take questions from the chat. We've had people having a look, monitoring it, and I think we've got some questions for the panel. And then, as I said, mentioned before the break at the beginning, we can stay on, some of us will be able to stay on at the end if you want to share things about your own experiences or have a conversation with us. It would be really good if we can do that after the official end. Just reminding you again that this is being recorded, so if you are at some point going to raise your hand and to ask a question, remember, if you don't want your name to be used, you can change your name or just put some initials there. So are we ready with some questions? Rachel, I think, has been
yes,
collecting some questions for us. Are we ready to start now?
Yes, thanks. We had lots of great questions. We'll do our best to get to all of them, although we might not be able to because we've had so many and so much great discussion. And the questions that are about kind of protocols kind of get priority. So one of them was, Pesach mentions a protocol he wrote that sets out Sounds like the whys and hows of putting a Soteria organization together. Would would he be willing to share this protocol with us? I can't hear you, Jen.
Is Pesak still here with us now? I can't see him.
I don't think he's on right now, but we can, they've already.
Yes, he is. He's here.
Oh, great.
Hi, Pesak. Did you hear that question?
I'm mute. Oh, okay. I heard only the beginning of it, and then I didn't hear your voice about protocol. I'm sorry, could you please repeat it?
Yes, Pesach mentions a protocol he wrote about the whys and hows of putting a Soteria organization together. Would he be willing to share this protocol with us?
I'd be willing to share it. I should just state that it's a historical document of very little actual value because we've done things so differently since then. It's gone through many permutations, and what we do currently have are the Ministry of Health criteria guidelines for how such homes have to be operated. In addition to that, we have our own Soteria guidelines, which are somewhat more demanding. We have our set of principles, which even though each Soteria house will have its own character based on who the director is, who the house mother father is, and all kinds of other staff people, but there are certain core principles about how we relate to people who need help, which are common to all the houses. So we have that. I mean, that original protocol is fascinating as a historical document, but it's changed so much based on what we've learned. Yeah.
Yes, I'm just wondering, Pesach, do you have a website in Israel where some of these things could be accessible?
We're developing it more now. We have a website at this point. It's in Hebrew, but people who contact me with questions, I'll certainly be happy to try to offer information, guidance, encouragement, empathy, whatever is necessary.
Thank you, Pesach. Yes, I think people might take you up on that. I'm sure people would find it useful. So, has anyone else got any other documents they think that people might find useful from your experience from a Peer Respite house? Or
This is Susan. We have the original business plan, which similar to Pesach did. It's one thing to put to paper, but it doesn't always look like that when you're done. But I'm glad to share anything like that if anybody wants to contact me.
Thank you, Susan. So
Great.
that's really, really good to know. So what other questions, Rachel?
And I'll just say that there's many documents already on the Peer Respite Soteria Summit website, and we can add whatever any of the panelists have or any of the participants have that think is useful. We can absolutely add it to the site. So that is one of the things we hope is that we're planning to be an ongoing organization that will be a repository for all these different kinds of documents, and where we can share our wisdom and what's worked and what hasn't, and do ongoing workshops. So yay.
Thank you, Grace. Yeah.
Great. This question was addressed to Jim Godstein. Maybe other people can weigh in as well, but the question was, do the not-for-profit organizations that provide non-medical support, are they dependent on donations only, or would they be funded by state bodies responsible for social affairs? This person said health insurance would not reimburse when something is not considered a medical or evidence-based therapy.
So Susan would actually be, I think, a lot better at answering this question, but I will just start out by saying that Soteria Alaska, well, first off, it had some unique funding from the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority to get it going, and then government support as part of its, government program. And then there was some Medicaid billing, but Medicaid is so kind of counter to the whole principles of Soteria that's somewhat problematic. But Susan, I think maybe you could probably flesh this out a little bit more.
Sure. So, so as Jim said, we did have unique funding, which would have been a grant from what's called the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority. That was the biggest chunk. The Medicaid funding, we did bill under in the US, it's called the rehab option, but that was only about 7% of our funding. And then the other part of funding came from some, I don't know how to describe it. It's state funding, but it's specifically for room and board for particular kinds of group homes. And that was our second, I think our second biggest chunk of, well, after the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority, we were able to get funding through the state, and that became the biggest chunk. And then, but we supplemented to cover costs with this kind of housing, room and board funding that came our way per each person. That was the benefit, to speak to what Cindy was talking about, of us becoming licensed, is that that funding became available to us if we got licensed, and we're a not-for-profit, as Jim was saying. We had minimal fundraising. In retrospect, I would think about, one thing I learned is what I would think about is ensuring that some board members were actually good fundraisers and could get, because usually that's flexible funding. If somebody makes a donation, that's usually pretty flexible. And so I would suggest that, but in my mind, it's always good to have a blending in case one goes away, you still have some of the other funding.
Yeah, and I might just add, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Susan, but I think that the implication of the question was that you don't get private insurance funding is correct. I don't think we ever got any, let alone significant insurance, private insurance company reimbursement.
So that's interesting, because I always think of Medicaid as like an insurance also. So I was thinking Medicaid, but no, we never got private insurance. I believe there's more flexibility in a managed care system, including the profit-making insurance companies and the Medicaid managed care, but Alaska doesn't have managed care. And I think other countries other than the US, as Pesach said, more civilized countries have more flexible healthcare. And I think that's an easier system to navigate because there's more flexibility. It's not a fee for service like ours was.
Thank you, Susan. So, I expect we've got some more questions, Rachel. You're muted, Rachel.
Sorry. Okay. Let's see.
I just want to say about funding. I'm sorry. We've had an interesting thing. The two runaway houses that we've been in contact with, and I'm sorry they're not on right now. As far as I know, if you're on, show yourself and talk directly. But there's one, the original one that I know of in the Netherlands, and then the one in Berlin. And Ute, you might be able to talk to this. But a lot of from what I understand, Peer Respites, and I don't know about Soterias, many of them, not all of them, but many of them aren't able to take people if they don't have a permanent address. And I think the fear is that if it's somebody who's houseless, they won't have any place to have them leave into a stable place, and so we just won't take them, is the wisdom. But the runaway houses get around that by only working with people who don't have stable addresses and get most of their funding as through houseless services and transitional housing pots of money. So I thought that was like to show like the variety and different ways that different places geographically and also just, you know, different places solve that.
That's interesting to know. So are we okay for another question now, Rachel?
Sure. Another question somebody asked was, what is a certified peer specialist and who provides the qualification, and can this be awarded internationally?
So there's a couple, it's based off state. So like we're in New York State, ours is called the Academy of Peer Services. And you do put the application in through the state to be approved to be a certified peer. It's 13 core courses online. You do have to apply and you have to have certain proof of hours to be able to be certified. Once you get that certification, the services provided are a billable service, approved in, you know, certain Medicaid providers. So there is that training. And then there's also a recovery coach training that's offered through New York State that focuses more so on substance use and, you know, obviously co-occurring. People with co-occurring experiences. So there is a couple different certifications. Internationally, I don't know. I know that I've had people move out of state and they've had to take the training over again at a different state for a different certification and apply through there. So I'm sure it varies from state to state.
Yeah, and I'd like to say in Iowa, we have the Iowa Workforce Collaborative, where the University of Iowa is contracted to do the peer recovery coach, the peer specialist, and the family peer specialist. And you take that 46-hour training, and then you can become certified through the ICNRC, which we require all of our staff to be certified because we have such a stigma, you know, where our position is sometimes reimbursed at a very low rate where we don't get recognized. Well, I want my peers to be recognized. I want them to have the highest recognition they can. And the ICNRC, as a matter of fact, my house manager lives in Illinois, and he was certified in that. And all he had to do, he didn't have to come to Iowa and take the training. Some states do require that, but he came to Iowa and all he did was transfer his certification. And now he's certified in both Illinois and Iowa. And I really think back to this is, you know, I hear the word crisis sometimes, and, you know, define a crisis to me. You know, if you lose your keys, are you going to have a crisis? Is, you know, having a homelessness a crisis? Some people look upon it like that. And, you know, I want to go back to the funding piece where my state, they said, well, you know, you're not working with people in crisis. Really, I'm not. Okay. So the point is what point of crisis do we call it a crisis? Do we wait for it to become a blown out crisis? Or is Peer Respite supporting people in a crisis? And we do, right? We talk about a warm line. You know, you touch the stove. If the stove's not hot yet, it's pre-warm, the warm line. If you touch a stove with a flame, there is the crisis, right? So I am not here to define whose crisis is what, but Peer Respite do handle a lot of people in crisis. I don't call it a crisis respite though, because if I called it a crisis respite, I'd have to be taking that higher level of care where we don't deal with that because we do not go out of the scope of practice that we are trained in.
Thank you, Todd. Have we got any more questions, Rachel?
Yes. Did we want to take another question, or do we want to go to having people who've raised their hands?
I want to add something in on this last question that I think it's important to recognize that there's such a diversity in Peer Respite and also Peer Respite and Soteria Houses. And Soteria Houses were designed for people in the, as just a high level of crisis. People who were admitted to the hospital were the original one, people were given the option to go to Soteria House. And I know there are some Peer Respites who will absolutely be there for people who would otherwise go to a hospital. So I think when people are thinking about starting their own, to know that there's a variety there. And as we continue after the summit to support people in creating these, hopefully we'll have experts who have done this from a variety of different styles of it to give a sense of the range of possibility so that you can make your own best choices about it.
Thank you, Grace. And I think one of the other things to remember is that when the first Soteria House was set up in 1972, they were working mainly with people who hadn't already been in the system, who weren't already on medication, perhaps just for a short time, but not long term. Whereas today, I think there might be more of a need for Soteria House or something like Soteria House that is working with people who've been on medication and might want to reduce it, which is a different ball game completely. But I think still something that a lot of people will be wanting to see if they can provide that. We haven't talked about that before, but I thought it was just worth mentioning that now because it fits in with what you're saying. I think it's something that some groups of people might want to try and do, and that's something in the future we might want to look at what kind of support is available for that. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point is, and to what extent the Soteria model really does or doesn't, work with those kind of people, and what adjustments maybe should be made, or if there's something completely different should, really.
Yeah.
I wonder if Pesach wants to chime in here because
I'd like to say something about that. The original Soteria was 3 to 6 months stay and was mainly for people with so-called first episode.
Yes.
Now, in the first 6 weeks, people were not even allowed to be given any medication, and after that, a certain percentage were. The Soteria should really, today, I think the best service which can be offered by Soteria is if it tries to help people at all stages with no previous hospitalizations, many previous hospitalizations, and such people have very different kinds of needs. Now, part of our having to work within the system and not just making some boutique for people who can pay out of pocket is that we had to go with a shorter duration of stay. Now, I say shorter. When I say 35 days, and you think about a United States psychiatric hospitalization, which averages about 7 days, so 35 still sounds very long. 35 is enough to produce certain changes. You can help people get a different perspective on what they need to do to move forward in their lives when they are surrounded by the kind of support they get in a Soteria home. If it's a first episode, then we can help people not go on medication and find other ways of working with their problem. If you get somebody who for 10 years has been getting Zyprexa or haloperidol, Seroquel, it would be almost cruel to try to take him off of that within 35 days or 2 months. And this is part of a much larger need. Soteria was and I think is mainly intended for acute care. People who are in a serious crisis, in extreme states where they really need to be in a place where they can be surrounded by other caring people around the clock. That is for an acute period. That's for a relatively brief period. Again, a month, maybe 2 months, sometimes even after 3, and sometimes even a couple of weeks can get the person back on its feet. A challenge in Soteria, one which we have only started to meet, is to provide the appropriate aftercare services, meaning that they leave Soteria and they continue to be helped in a place surrounded by an atmosphere like Soteria, where they are understood, empathized, not judged, where you have a lot of peer specialists who are helping them. There's something about this continuum from Soteria to after Soteria where many people in our experience still don't make the transition. And we've started developing programs of peer support groups, but we need more than that. We send people, we help people who have finished staying with us get into some of the existing rehab services, which sometimes are wonderful and sometimes they remain sort of a problematic gap between what they got used to with us and what happened with the rehab services. So it's a challenge which needs to be met about providing care for a longer period of time than a Soteria home is likely to be able to provide. I mean, if we would keep people from 3 to 6 months, then we would not get public funding. And this would remain something which, you know, some of the well-to-do people who want to pamper somebody in their home, we would send them to us. But that's not what we're after. So we think we provide very good care for the month or so. And we need to further develop the places where people can get help less intensive, less comprehensive, not around the clock, where they can get that before they come into us, instead of coming into us and after leaving us. Okay.
Thanks, Pesach.
And
And
I
again,
also add
yeah.
real quickly? So I like to think about it as we have the Soteria model, which has been researched, and that is on people who are neuroleptically naive. But then what we don't know, because it hasn't been as well researched, but I think we all believe that the Soteria approach of being with and non-institutional will be effective with others. But I do think it's important to make the distinction that we're talking about 2 different things: a model which is well researched, and then the other thing, which is an approach that we think will apply, but we don't really know because we don't have enough research.
No.
And that's all I'll say.
No, thank you, Susan. I was just going to mention the fact that for the past few years, Norway has had to provide what are called meds-free wards in each hospital, which when you actually, Bob Whittaker has been over to look at them and he's talked about them. And what he was saying was, although in theory they're meds-free wards, most of the people that are going there are already on medication. So what they're working on is, if people want, is how to reduce the medication. So I'm hoping over time we might get some good information, some good advice from there. And I think in the future, when we're continuing with this, if this is an area that we want to look at more, because I think it's an important area that we haven't really talked about until now, it would be good to invite people to speak who are working on those so-called meds-free wards about how they're managing to support people when they're reducing medication. Just thought I'd say that while we're talking about it, something to think about for the future. So
maybe we can take a question, a live question. And again, this is for the panelists who can talk about kind of the administrative things if you have questions about that. Eliza, would you like to ask your question? Unmute. Yeah.
Yes.
Good.
Thank you. Yes, my question is whether there's a place for self-funded alternatives, because I know how hard it can be to get state funding and grant funding, and even if you're billing and all these ways. But I do know there have been several successful models that have self-funded, And I just want to know if you guys can speak to that, at least as a way to get started. Like communes, yeah?
Is there anyone that would like, can comment on that, has had any experience of that?
Well, Eliza is one of the people that founded Ionia in the Kenai Peninsula, and that's I think of it organized kind of as a kibbutz in the same way that a kibbutz is rather than a commune. But you probably can talk about that as much as anybody. But it's a group of people. I think of them as refugees from the psychiatric system back east. Quite a few years ago, what, 30 years ago now, maybe longer, and got a plot of land and started farming and macrobiotics, and they have I think community meetings every day, and they just pooled all their resources. So it's a very interesting thing that they've done there.
Eliza, unmute. Judine, can somebody unmute Eliza?
That is
Lisa.
true, but I was wondering if there's any more out there, because Delancey Street is the only other model that I've heard of that started that way, and I'm curious if there's others.
Is there anyone in our participants who knows of any other? Put it on the chat or raise your hand. You know of any others in other parts of the world?
Maybe don't raise your hand, just unmute yourself and say.
Unmute. Yeah. Can they unmute themselves, Grace?
And I'll say that Vic Welly, who was spoke at one of the earlier Sundays this month, also has that idea, and hopefully they will be at one of our future more in-depth talks about funding, and I hope you will be there to share your information as well, because I'm sure there are other people who are interested. Rachel, we're doing a few questions from the chat, and then we'll do a live question.
Yes. Yes. Another question was, I'm wondering if any panelists have had experience with using legal structures that are not nonprofit corporations. I'm especially interested in worker co-op structures. I've seen a lot of conflict issue with nonprofit corporations where the board of directors can get quite distant from the work and needs over time. Someone else also spoke to this of nonprofits drifting from their original mission and values. At least one other person mentioned that as well.
If I can say something about that, we are a nonprofit. We have Soteria Homes for 5 years. The nonprofit has been around for 7 years. And there's often been a tension between the Soteria sensibility on the ground, no hierarchy, everyone works together, and the conventional structure of a board of directors which can make decisions. And so the issue is real. It hasn't always been easy to navigate there. And right now, as I told, there's been a lot of changes in the personnel of the board of directors, and there's a bottom-up initiative going on to try to figure out the best way to run the organization so that it is Soteria all the way through. How much this means being a cooperative type of place, I don't know. If I knew the answer, then I guess we'd be authoritarian. We're trying to figure this out. The issue is real. The issue that you've pointed out here is it's a real one, and we're avidly looking around for for the proper model for operating a Soteria home?
I think this issue of, remaining true to the mission and core values is very important, and can be very hard to maintain. I remember talking to Lauren, Dr. Mosier, and he expressed that as a huge problem, and never really figure out how to do it. And certainly we've had that problem. I've experienced that problem, but one of the, I think, real issues is in trying to do something other than through, an incorporated nonprofit that's got tax exempt status, at least in the US, is it's pretty hard to get government funding, foundation funding, if you don't have that status.
Well, here's the bottom line for us anyway. I've had some changes in 6 years of our board of directors, but when we're choosing them board of directors, my board, we are looking for somebody with some significant background, legal, whatever the case may be, but are they holding true to what our mission and values are? And the same goes with our funding. Many times, and actually my board president had said this, well, why don't we become Medicaid billable? No, because accreditation here says that you have to have clinical oversight. And if we are a peer respite, a true peer respite nonprofit, then we truly do not bill Medicaid. We do not become embedded in that hierarchy. Now, here's the thing that I will do with the MCOs is I will contract with them if I can get them to come to the table and agree to that, because they do it in some states. Peer support is contracted, but I will not allow this. And I started this. I will educate my board of directors. I will not have debate. I will not have conflict, but I will discuss why we are here, why we are in business, who is it we're serving, right? And we do interview some of our funders. We have not accepted some money because they wanted us to go away from what our mission and values were.
That's such an important point, and one of the things that I used to give little seminars on writing grant applications, and one is to not chase the money. Because you can really change what you're doing. Funders say, oh, we want you to do this instead of what you really want to do, and you really have to avoid that and stay true to your mission.
Yeah.
I want to jump in just real quick. So when we talk about sustainability, often we're really referring to funding, but I learned this in a seminar and it really rang true, is really we're talking about sustainability of your purpose, your vision, your mission, and then the funding part comes later. You will not be sustainable if you lose your purpose and your vision.
Thank you. And I think one of the things you said before, Susan, was where possible, I think you mentioned it today as well, try and ensure that you've got funding from different sources rather than all from one source. And that gives you a bit more leeway, I guess, if you've got funding from different sources. Good to do if you can. So have we got any more questions now? Either from the chat or from people that have got their hands up?
Yeah, Rachel.
Sure. Let's see. One question is whether Soteria helps people who are either incarcerated currently or otherwise involved in the legal system.
Let me answer that. Legally, we cannot take somebody who is an involuntary hospitalization, involuntary stay, because we do not have the legal standing to take such people in, and because we also refuse to treat people against their will. However, what we do manage to do is when you have a psychiatric legal committee deciding on extending somebody's involuntary stay, we can offer ourselves as an option. So the committee doesn't have to decide whether he remains incarcerated in the hospital or goes home. We become a viable option where the person who refuses to be in the hospital agrees to come into us. And I always like to tell about one day I went into a hospital based on prior intelligence information I had acquired. And after several hours and several discussions with colleagues who were the head of departments, I left with 3 people who had been hospitalized involuntarily within the past 2 or 3 days. And I took them out and put them into our Soteria homes. So we cannot take people who continue to refuse to be even with us. But we will often have people who refuse to be in the hospital and will come in with us. So I hope that at least partially answers the question.
Thank you.
I can also speak from Soteria Alaska experience, and we also never took anybody who was committed. And I'll just give a brief story. So there was a guy that was living at Soteria Alaska, and he had gotten into some trouble with the court system. And here in the US, we have something called therapeutic courts. And the therapeutic courts, as part of his court requirements, said that he had to live at Soteria, where he already was voluntarily. So I found that like really odd. And so I went to the courts and I said, we will have to discharge him if you commit him to Soteria, because we cannot take anybody who has not come to us voluntarily, and he already is here voluntarily. So they, rather than having to commit him to some other house, they removed that requirement, and he stayed until he was ready to leave. And that's my little story around that.
That's really good to hear. Just to say, in the UK, we're in the process of having a new mental health act. It seems to have been going on for a long, long time, but there is a possibility that when the new act is published, that people who are in the process of being detained, and they might change the way that works here, that if there is, if they know of a least restrictive alternative rather than being in hospital, they can ask about that. That was what was written into a sort of an earlier version. So we're hoping that that's something that does become a reality, but time will tell. It's interesting that the people that wrote the review of the current Mental Health Act and had recommendations from what should be in the new one did hear about the Soteria Bradford House that I'd opened up, and they did a bit of research and also looked at what the World Health Organization had said and the UN around alternatives, and they did put that into the review. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that that might be in our new Mental Health Act, but who knows?
And I like to say that in the United States, that's actually a constitutional principle, that someone has the right to the least restrictive for psychiatric imprisonment, or euphemistically called involuntary commitment, or forced drugging, the least intrusive alternative. I don't, and I've always felt, and I don't think any Soterias or maybe even Peer Respite, maybe Peer Respites are really being available to people for that. But I think it's really critical because, you look at, I mean, Robert Whitaker's talk, to your group, Jen, last July, really demonstrates how important it is to keep people from getting put on the neuroleptics in the first place. And this legal system that locks people up and then forces them to take these drugs is just tracking so many people into this career as being a mental patient and lifelong disability. So I really would hope that there get to be enough of these alternatives, and that they become alternatives to people being locked up and drugged against their will.
In the US, we have what's called SAMHSA block grant money, and I believe 30% of that is supposed to be designated for first episode, what's so-called first episode psychosis. It's, to the best of my knowledge, I've never seen any of that put toward a well, I can't speak to the peer respite, so you guys can tell about that, but certainly not Soteria type houses. And I find that, again, odd, because that's what it's geared for. So.
Jolene or Maria, do you know anything about that funding?
Yeah, so we do, we get a lot of different funding for a lot of different programs. But I know you had mentioned for a certain percentage goes for people with like first time episodes. We do have with certain counties contracts where we save a certain amount of beds for people that have been in a state hospital for at any point in their life. So that way, if they're the most high need, that we have availability to take them first. And then we also have different agreements, like in Putnam County, we have an agreement where there might be someone that they're trying to help avoid hospitalization, and it's not our standard 5 to 7 days, but we actually get additional funding sometimes from that county to take people for 2 to 3 weeks so that they can find them the appropriate level of housing that would best meet their needs. Housing is a big issue. I think it's been brought up many times. But we do try to encourage people to contact us if they're staying at a community residence, and they, instead of going to the hospital, to come to us instead, to avoid the hospital. But they are usually people that have been transitioned from a state hospital, and we do, like I said, keep a certain amount of beds opened for those individuals.
So Jolene, do you ever have the situation where the hospital is trying, is filed to, commit someone, and the defense is there's a less restrictive alternative, one of the Rose houses, and so they make that argument and not end up being locked up?
Yeah, so, like I said, we do have our staff embedded in the local hospitals, so they do interact with people that are going there because they feel like they're in crisis. So a lot of times people want to voluntarily go into the unit because they feel that that's where they need to be at that time. But we can offer the same support and resources at the Rose House. So we do try to get people over to the Rose House, and we have multiple houses around surrounding areas. So even if we're full, we try to transport, we'll kind of move people around to make sure that we meet those needs. I think that we do get pretty good support from the social workers and the people assessing individuals in the ED. So they'll actually bring up to someone if they don't feel that, if they could feel like they can avoid having them go inpatient, then they'll actually suggest that, they reach out to us and directly link us in that moment.
How about the situation where the hospital thinks the person should be hospitalized, and the patient says, "Oh, I'm entitled to be at Rose House instead"?
They probably, for our local hospitals, if the person is not saying they need to be there, unless they make a very serious, like, suicidal threat to harm themselves or others, the hospital won't forcefully put them on the unit. Our local hospitals have really been trying to avoid hospitalization at all costs. We have seen that a lot. A lot of times people can, like, what's called 945s, like the police or the Department of Behavioral Health has mandated that someone needs to go to the emergency department because they're so at risk and they need to be evaluated. But just because they get 945'd and brought to the ED by police, that doesn't necessarily mean they're actually going to be put on the unit. That's where we try to, if they're not going to put them inpatient, but they're still in need, they can come to us instead. But
that sounds brilliant. Yeah.
Wonderful. I don't think, unless someone is really saying they have a plan, they can't safety plan, most of our hospitals are not actually putting people in the units, and they're at capacity. over the past year with COVID as well. So there could be other reasons for that. So I think it's this year has just made it complicated. But from what I've seen, it's even if some providers, like clinical providers, feel like someone should be put inpatient, there are people that are frustrated because they're not being forcefully put inpatient. There's like this change happening. So I think people have their different opinions on it based on, you know, their assessment of the situation.
And I'm wondering if there's anything, the conversation has been very US focused. We've got some input from how Israel's doing it. I'm wondering if anyone, even from the participants, has something from other countries.
We did have a couple people ask in the chat about if there were any ideas for starting Soteria in Europe, and one person asked specifically about Spain. I don't know how much we can talk about specific countries or regions, but a couple of people did ask about that.
So I'm wondering if Louise has something to add here.
Can I?
You're muted, Louise. Unmute again. Whoop. Upside down.
Unmute.
There you go.
I should be unmuted now. Great.
You are.
Yeah. I mean, an awful lot of this has been about the American model, and I think so. I mean, perhaps we'd be better talking sometimes with Jen on the Soteria UK network. Two things I'm just going to say is locally, we have a brilliant church, one of the Vineyard churches, who runs a sort of charity shop in Ashford called the Beehive, but they do a huge amount of outreach work, in particular with domestic violence, and they get sent a lot of people by the local council. Now, what's interesting is that somebody can come in there with only the clothes they stand up in. They're taken round a very, very high quality shop and charity shop in their own shop, and they're given clothes and it gets put through the till as no payment. Now, what's really interesting is one of our local agencies, the Straw Trust, came to see them and talk to them about how the model worked, and also to ask what was the criteria that people need to come there. And our workers sat down and said, well, we don't have anybody. Anybody can come who are sent to us. And we sit them down with a cup of tea and a piece of cake, and we talk to them about what their needs are. And we then work from there. The bloke from the Shaw Trust, well, he just couldn't get over it. He was absolutely gobsmacked. He said, but surely you have to fill in forms, criteria, everything else. And they said, well, no, it doesn't work like that. Well, how do you fund it? Well, we fund it through selling things in the shop. So I'm thinking with the Soteria model idea, and maybe aftercare, this idea of kind of cottage industries, that kind of thing, that those kind of social enterprise things could be used to fund and help that kind of thing. The other thought I have here with funding in this country is one of the big problems can be, and I've had this situation, you apply for funding for a project, the project goes really well for a year, your funding runs out, but you can't apply for any more because all they want is new initiatives. So you've almost got to kind of reinvent the wheel. So even if it works and you can prove that, they tell you, well, you're not eligible, and it's come up with something new. So that element doesn't work very well. The other thing, Jen, I have to say about the Mental Health Act, yes, I can see what you're on about, but unless you've got a network of these things all over the country and it's not in your area, I'm sorry, they're going to gang up with you and stick you in hospital. So I'm a bit skeptical over some of that. So
yes,
but
I don't know whether it's going to happen, but if it is in there, the way I see it is there's more of an incentive then, both for communities and local trusts, to be able to provide an alternative. If in the Mental Health Act it states that people have a right to look for the least restrictive alternative, it might be some more forward-thinking trusts.
I agree.
It gives them more of an incentive to work with perhaps local.
I think what's interesting round here is we've just set up locally to work with third sector and voluntary organisations to provide community services. The support model. We've got a band 8 lived experience in somebody in our local engaging Kent system. But what worries me is a lot of people, and I've seen a real separation amongst service users, where a lot of service users are so stuck in the medical model and working with statutory services that it loses its point. And that's what's happening a lot with our peer services in this country. So peer services within statutory care have lost their way slightly. And in fact, they've just produced nationally a new set of value-based and training idea for peers, which was done by, I think it was Steve Pilling and stuff at UCL, which they took really good advice from lived experience, but the thing was actually written in the end by the professionals. So there was a lot of discussion about the fact this is not peer owned. And so in a way, this is where I worry about, I know America are doing it with the IPS model, but so is once you start introducing statutory training and everything, you lose that value of peer stuff. And so this all worries me.
So I'm wondering if we only had half an hour for the official program. We'll stay on after and have informal discussion for as long as folks want, maybe. It's gone on quite long in previous times, but I'm wondering if in our last half hour we could get in a few more questions and hear from a few voices that we haven't heard from yet. Some new voices.
Yeah, I think that's great, but I just want to make one point about I've said that people have the right to the least restrictive and least intrusive alternative in the US, but that right is basically never honored. And so we really need to, that's why I was asking questions about that.
Thank you.
Sorry.
So Rachel, do you have someone, or should I call on the next person?
Yes, somebody had asked, and someone asked this something similar last week, and we didn't have time to address it, but somebody asked about how COVID is being handled, including if there's a COVID vaccine mandate for the programs that are still open.
So I can touch on our houses. We had obviously went virtual for many months. We had transferred our warm lines that are at every house directly to the staff so that they could work from home. So we were keeping that open throughout the whole year. We actually were one of the first providers to reopen in our area in New York State, especially because some of our houses are very close to Westchester, New York, which was one of the worst hit for COVID and a very big hotspot for a long period of time. We are not mandating that people get vaccinated. If they're interested in getting vaccinated, we actually will transport them and set up the appointment for them. Our state has really encouraged us, not just at our diversion houses, but also like our housing programs and all of our programs to help set up, mass vaccinations for people that are interested. The same thing goes for staff. They're not mandated to have the vaccine. We do get them connected to get the vaccine if they're interested, but they probably will be having people prove a test weekly in the near future, but we are at reduced capacity still. So for our houses that hold 6 people, we're serving 3 to 4. For the houses that maybe hold 3 people, we're serving 1 or 2. And we have, a strict COVID policy in place. Masks are being worn, but we've been managing that. And I think like everyone else, a big impact of COVID has been the workforce. And when you have guests at the house and you're trying to serve people and someone has COVID or there's a staff shortage or, they're home for 2 weeks because they were exposed, I think it was quite a challenge. And I can say that all of the forums that I've been attending recently, workforce is one of the main topics due to COVID. And that could be difficult when you need to keep sites open, but you have people mandated to stay home. So I'm sure everyone experiences those challenges too.
Thank you. Have we got another question, Rachel? Or a hand up?
Yes, but should we, I know we were going to alternate. Should we go to someone who has their hand raised now?
Yeah, I saw there was a question about the addressing specifically the needs of the BIPOC folk and being culturally humble, competent, centered. We had we were hoping to have somebody, and hopefully in the future we'll have somebody from Sally's Place, which is a Latinx and Afrocentric peer respite. And I know Cindy has some thoughts on that too, but does anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I just think that Soteria Houses basically take on the nature of who lives there and works there. And in that sense, that at least Soteria Alaska, and what I understand from the original Soteria, it just takes on the flavor of who is there, and the lack of hierarchy. It's kind of, so the nature of being with is to be responsive. I guess that's what I'd say to whoever's there. That's the short version. And I see lots of hands up.
Those aren't hands to address this specific question. There's no way, people just, if there's a way to address this question, you can just unmute yourself. Those are people with other questions. But I will say that in extensive conversations with Boyce Hendricks, who was one of the 3 people who got the original Soteria House off the ground, he was at the time that he was working and starting to help co-create the original Soteria House. He was also a student and going to African studies classes, and the concept of Ubuntu really he really brought into the house. And so the concept of I am because you are and we are is in a part what shaped the whole, how, yeah, what shaped the whole how Soteria ended up being. Okay, Rachel. Oh, the host is not allowing us to unmute ourselves. I thought we were all able to chime in on questions at this point.
This is just to prevent people from speaking up and speaking over each other until it officially ends. After it officially ends, we'll have a normal open community for people.
But if people want to address this question or any of the questions from the, yeah.
If they could
say hands up.
If they could say something in chat to address a question, then we can try and unmute them that way.
All right. And also this is actually, I thank you for reminding me, this is also timed specifically to hear from the presenters.
Yeah, and it looks like some people have had their hands raised for quite some time, so I'll defer to, I know we had a lot of questions in the chat, but it looks.
Right, so it's always, last time we found that we were deferring a lot to the people with the raised questions, so we were trying to make sure we got the questions, some of the questions from the chat that had been from a while. But let's go with Rebecca. Do you want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. So I'm in the UK and we have a system where some mental health staff in the UK have statutory responsibility, which I'll just explain a little bit in case anyone doesn't know. But the most important thing about that is if a person who's labelled as mentally ill, who's in contact with that person, the one with statutory responsibility, kills themselves or significantly harms someone else, then the state is going to come and start interrogating the staff member, and the staff member has to provide evidence of appropriate interventions, otherwise their head is on the chopping block. And then added to that, there's also a general expectation in society that mental health staff should be controlling people labelled with mental illness and stopping any of them ever from committing suicide or harming anyone else. So I'm just wondering what the situation is with staff in Soteria. Do any of them have statutory responsibility or anything like that? And how would this issue be addressed? So that's my question. Thank you.
Again, I can only speak for the US. So there's a thing called mandatory reporting, which I guess is kind of like what you're talking about. And I've been involved in some other kind of, I wouldn't call it a summit, but seminars like this. And that's coming up as a big issue among the people who are peer providers, because they believe in a mutuality, and then suddenly they're in a position where they have to possibly be responsible if they haven't reported something, which could be, potential child abuse. It could be, someone who's going to hurt themselves. So it's a big dilemma. I don't have an answer, but it's a big dilemma. Soteria House, we grappled with that all of the time because the doors are opened. It's not locked. We didn't restrain. We didn't. I remember a situation where somebody would be out walking and run into traffic. And are we responsible? So we tried to do it in the context of Soteria. I'd love to hear Pesach's thought on this too, but we tried to do it in a context of Soteria, of being someone, and rather than doing two and saying, okay, we're going to tie you up, we're going to talk about this, or we're going to work with you, and that's all I'll say about it. But it was a cause of a lot of sleeplessness in my life to know what to do. But I think in way of being transparent, it's important to just keep always talking about it and being authentic. I can't say this enough, being authentic with the person. When you do that, it harms me in a certain kind of way. I don't want you to harm yourself, but I also, it puts me in a really challenging position. Can we talk about how we can negotiate this? So that's kind of the way we handled that in Soteria House, understanding that there were certain mandatory things, but we almost never, I don't even remember times where we had to do that. But anyway, but it's a cause, it's a dilemma, and it's a cause of my own personal great anxiety to know what the right thing to do is. And I'd love to hear if Pesach can talk from the Israeli experience, or anybody else,
Sure. Well, the center, the heart of our staff are the companions, but there is also professional staff, and the main I think the main responsibility of the professional staff is to support the companions so they can do their work, and the professional staff which takes responsibility for things such as people who leave the home, or if there's any kind of violence happening, and that's the service which they provide. But I agree very much with what we heard from Alaska Soteria, that of course this is something that's being discussed and understood in a very open way in the house if there's been some violence. So we have a house meeting to talk about it. And since we're operating like a therapeutic community, we have presenting the people in the community and staff together, and the residents, and working together and trying to figure this out. And it's a very tricky situation because boundaries can be necessary and boundaries can be abused. And we're careful about, and always about now.
And I want to ditto endless house meetings. Everything is talked about.
Yeah, I think this is something that we may come back to again next week when we're talking more about the house and the qualities of the staff and more about what we mean by being with. I think it will come up again, but I think it's also worth looking at what the stats show about how many people either take their own lives or attempt to take their own lives or disappear from what we might call a state institution or statutory hospital, and how many in a peer respite or a soteria. There probably isn't enough evidence to show that, but I think we also have to take into account what might lead up to somebody wanting to disappear or be in such a state of distress that they no longer want to be there, and look at what the different environments can help or not. And I think we have to look at that when we're thinking about this issue.
So Chad has requested someone to speak, and Grace asked if they could comment. So I'm just going to ask them to unmute.
So Jay Farrow has been trying to address the question about BIPOC folk a while ago, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to unmute you at the time because my computer keeps freezing. But if somebody can unmute.
I actually can hear. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah. Hi, this is me. Hi, I'm
Thank
actually
you.
an Asian person, as you can see. I have a question actually with regards to BIPOC, because I find that, you know, we mentioned a lot of things about Peer Respite Soteria, but it's mainly for those who perhaps have, you know, they are English spoken, so they actually have the linguistic capabilities and, you know, something they are familiar. I'm saying this because in Asia, where I'm from originally, we have a lot of folks who actually frown upon when you speak out about your you know, just to speak out, let alone to address cultural stigma. Because I mean, those with who's actually in the East might recognize this as to something that we call a taboo. We don't want to address anything like with regards to mental health. So when you talk about peer respite and you talk about going down to CSU, you know, the crisis unit, we would always think that, oh, you know, that person is going to the crazy home or something like that, which is very bad, right? It's not really a way to connect, a way to actually learn. But a lot of people who are coming out now, you can see there's a lot of things like Asian race crime, etc. But what I'm trying to say, similar like that, you know, there are also Asians that actually needs to go to home too, to address their mental health challenges when they're not ready to go back home yet. But how do you find language, like education or things that would be more supportive to address this stigma that we go through? You know, we are trying to come out to understand, as a peer advocate, I'm trying to understand and share my perspective, but I'm still yet to find a verbiage that's actually able to bridge between the you know, like respite programs or things that is supporting from the local government to our own self, the community members. So that's what I wanted to share.
I just wanted to point out that recently, I think that has been formed, I think it's called instead of MAD in America, or we have MAD, there's MAD in Canada and MAD in the UK. I think there is a MAD in Asia. So it might be worth looking at the website to see if there's ways in which people can connect with each other to support each other in trying to think about different ways of talking about their experiences.
Would you be able to kindly send me some information? I'm at California now, and I'm trying to help some of the marginalized community who are Asian and who have struggled with language, etc.
Yes, if someone was able to look that up, I think it's called MAD in Asia. which is similar to Mad in America. If you look at the Mad in America website, there might be a link to it.
And Jay, are you talking, I'm sorry, where are you, what country are you talking about?
I'm in California now, but I'm talking about Southeast Asia. I'm talking about the community here in California. You know, in San Francisco, for example, we have a lot of Chinese people. And, you know, there's no one brush, you know, like one size fits all, right? So I'm trying to think about like people of Asian, doesn't mean Chinese alone. It could be Tibetan, it could be Vietnamese, and etc. Because for us, we are all shy to come out. Because a lot of times you say, what stays in the home stays in the home. You know, you don't want to talk about it. And this is the barriers that we face. If we don't come out and speak about it and normalize these conversations, we will never learn. That's why I keep on mentioning to you guys, because for us here, we are more outspoken because we are actually, this is a culture that's here in the West. But coming from an East background, I find that I notice a lot of my peers are actually struggling, even just to tell someone within, you know, not the family member about what, or yeah, there are also a few that mentioned to me, I can't talk this to my father because he doesn't understand what I'm going to. And, you know, like there's so many, you know, integrity things we need to talk about before we can even bring out to scale it, you know, if you understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge that I think there is a need. We were really excited to try to make the connection with Sally's Place. That was more of a peer respite that was founded and in Latinx and African American communities, because there is a problem with these more alternative and radical mental health spaces being very white dominated and from a Euro-American centric paradigm, even if it's an alternative paradigm. And so I think it is important for all of us to be constantly working on how we're dealing with our own privilege and supremacy and trying to make spaces that are really buy-in for people, you know, from all who's ever showing up and not showing up, and to be really curious and doing the hard work of why aren't people showing up, maybe from different racial and cultural groups. But the best, I think, is when people get together and create it themselves. And if there's a way that we can have this be supporting that, that would be amazing.
I would love to share with like-minded folks. Sorry.
No, go on.
Can I just end it very quickly? I just want to say, I know I don't want to take everyone's time, but I need to tell you I'm here. I'm trying to help a lot of communities already. I've done with CREE as to bringing them together to make sure these are something that they don't tread upon, you know, like, because stigma is a major issue. And I think we all need to come in solidarity to help also folks of color, because it might not just be Asian alone, but yeah. Asian is right now the most, fastest growing population in the US. And I think we need to do something to address these issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate your feedback, and I just want to speak a little bit about just a little, because I'm kind of here for Soteria, but the Soteria Alaska had a huge diversity in the people who came to live there and the people who worked there, more so the people who came to live there. But we have 269 federally recognized tribes in Alaska. So we had Alaska Native people. We have a huge Filipino population in Anchorage. We have a very large Mexican population in Anchorage. So unfortunately, our board was not that diverse in that regard, I would say, but certainly the house takes on the culture. And so just one thing that to me, the conversation is more important than the answer, because if you met one Alaska Native, you only met one Alaska Native. You can't, do you know what I mean? You can't just assume that Native Americans are all like. They're not. And that's true of people who are from Southeast Asia. They're very different. So you could never know every culture, but I think the conversation is important. If there's space for the conversation, and also Soteria Alaska, we invited families in. We had families that would come, and we had a Filipino guy, and his family would come every week, and food, like so many families, is important. They would come and make a meal, and the whole community would work with them. Even though we only had the one Filipino guy, everybody else would work with them on creating the meal. And they were learning, as that would happen, they were learning about their co-residence culture and family. And so stuff like that happens in Soteria. I don't know if it happens like that in Peer Respites, because I think the stay is shorter. Our stays are longer. That's all.
Yeah, I think it's also really nice to see people that come in for a respite stay. Like you were saying, like everyone kind of has their own interests. So there's someone that might be really into crafts, or someone that's really into cooking, or we have special rooms that have like really nice art supplies and a ton of instruments. So you'll actually see people start to support each other, the guests, not just the peer staff offering support, but then they're building relationships so that when they leave, they have now created like a new friend. They cook meals together. And then I think what you were saying is the house feels, it takes on a feeling based on like who's there and the staff. And, you know, I think that when you're hiring like a very diverse staff and you have very diverse people coming in, everyone kind of brings something to the table, and you see those like connections build, and then they learn about each other and become more comfortable sharing about themselves. So I think that that's one of the nicest things to see in the houses and situations like that, where people actually leave and they have a support that isn't just a provider, it's another community member that understands what they're going through. So it's just a beautiful thing. So
thank you.
Yeah, several people in the chat mentioned that they were people of color or LGBTQIA, and that they didn't always feel comfortable bringing it up, or they didn't feel like it was well received if they experienced some kind of discrimination or oppression in these kind of spaces and tried to bring it up. Does anyone have any ideas about how to make a space where these issues can be brought up, if creating a more equitable and inclusive space?
Is it Raza got his hand up? Is it Raza? Yeah.
I don't. Can Rasa be unmuted, please?
There we go. Yeah. Well, I'm just relating to this to my experience in a mental health therapeutic community in England run by statutory services. So not specifically Soteria, but maybe there are some considerations that need to be borne in mind. Doesn't matter whether it's Soteria or other services, because I think what was played out was group dynamics. And if one is from a marginalized group, I think whether it's racialized communities, LGBTQI, or whatever it is, or even a gender that is marginalized, you know, because I witnessed all of these marginalizations, discriminations taking place within this therapeutic community, where the emphasis was very much on we are a community and we care about each other and help each other. But the problem is that's not enough. It's not enough just to state that, because it assumes a non-hierarchical kind of, because we come from society which is very, very hierarchical, and those hierarchies can be replicated even with the most well-intentioned, you know, therapeutic communities. And what I strongly felt was it wasn't enough just to kind of name and address discriminations as and when they happen. It's not just about having a good reactive kind of strategy to when these things happen, because by then it's too late. People who are already disenfranchised, if they experience that again within a supposedly, enabling space, that's enough to shut them up. But so what needs to really happen is there needs to be a proactive culture, which needs to be stated again and again, and it needs to be demonstrated. It's not just about having the words, it's about having it demonstrated again and again so that people from minoritized groups can develop a kind of incipient self-confidence that they will be received well, because they may not be used to being received well, within hierarchical social spaces. So this is really, really, and it's not even that, most of the people in that space were well-intentioned. But for example, once I heard someone whose his nephew, he was someone from a majority white community. His nephew very tragically had been he bled to death, in his arms on the street. So this is a horrific, horrific experience. Many of us had experienced sexual abuse and other kinds of abuse. So whenever he referred to that incident, he referred to this black man. I mean, I don't identify as black, but I'm brown. But nevertheless, there is an overlap between black and brown experiences. It's different, but there is an overlap in terms of racism. So in that way, it felt as if that person was their skin tone was being referenced, but others of us may have experienced similar kind of violence from, let's say, white people, but we didn't kind of reference that, or even other white people didn't reference the person who had abused them as a white abuser. So that made me feel, I experienced that as racist. It probably wasn't intended as racist. So how can those kind of issues be unpicked so that the space doesn't feel excluding of myself, but also in a way that doesn't somehow silence the man who referred to the person who murdered his nephew, as a black man? It's very tricky. It's very tricky. Anyway, I'll shut up.
Thank you. And I think that's why it's really important, whatever the house is, whatever kind of community it is, that there is genuine openness and genuine trust that it is okay to talk about what you're feeling, even if you're not sure whether people will get it or not. And I think it might refer back to a couple of things that people mentioned. So in terms of the staffing, look at the volunteers, the people that are there to support other people, do they reflect the community? And thinking about what we might call board of directors or a sort of a hierarchy above that. Have you got people at different levels that are able to raise issues in a different way? I think those things are important, rather than it being left to people that already might be struggling and might not want to raise things at the time. It's all of these things I think are really important to consider. Thank you. How are we doing?
I appreciate this conversation, and I think this might be also something that might want to be addressed next week when people are talking about how we do this. I hope people come back, and I hope people stay if you want, and we can continue talking. There's so many people who have questions and comments who didn't get to ask them. Some of the panelists might stay, many will have to leave, many of us will have to leave, many might stay. So, and maybe we could just have time for an official ending and then continue on.
Can I just say something really quickly? One person just mentioned, we've talked about some really heavy and difficult stuff. So definitely we want everyone to feel like they can take care of themselves and seek support as needed, because definitely talked about some really heavy and complicated stuff today. So thank you everyone for sharing.
I just wanted to say
You're on
thank
mute
you,
again.
everyone. Sorry.
And sorry, just before Al comes back to officially close this part of the meeting, I'd just like to say a big thank you to all of the panel, to Grace, and to all of you out there for such thoughtful questions and comments. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being here today. So is Al there now?
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Al.
I'm pleased to be the official closer of the official 3-hour time that we spent together. And I just want to thank Jen for doing a wonderful job of moderating for all the panelists and for all the participants. And so this is an official closing, but as you've heard, anybody who wants to stay on can stay on and you know, keep on talking and interacting and wondering and visioning the future and what we can do to help people, including ourselves, of course. So farewell until next week, until next Sunday.